Hello, I'm Cheryl Meyer, and I'm otherwise known as Cheryl M. Health Muse. And what my goal is to inspire you to lead a healthier life. So when I proposed my podcast, I proposed that we present it in two different segments. The first one is It Feels Good to Feel Good, Future-Proof Your Health, where I get to share everything I have learned to return my health back to relative wellness and to live a pain-free life in spite of the fact that I have autoimmune disease. But the second part of my podcast is this episode, and that's Tell Me Your Story, the Health Muse is in. My concept with this is it's all fine and well that you hear me tell my story, but I get a lot of, it's all fine and well that it worked for you, but it's not going to work for me. And I wanted you to hear that there are lots of people out there that have made changes in their lifestyle that have supported their health and brought them back to relative wellness. We all have a couple things in common. We all owned our own health. Whatever the doctor was suggesting we did was going on a parallel path to us making these lifestyle changes where we did things that cleaned up our toxic load. We all pay attention to our body. You'll hear jazz in the background because I want you to listen to the rhythm of your health, and I want you to pay attention to what your body is telling you. My body had been trying to tell me that I was going to topple over into toxic load for some time. I just wasn't listening. So if you clean up your lifestyle and if you listen to your body, you have a very good chance not of being deprived in any way, but returning to feeling darn good. And that's what these podcasts are really all about. So thank you for joining me. This is going to be a Tell Me Your Story, the Health Muse is in episode, and I hope you enjoy it. And I hope that we all inspire you to lead a healthier, happier life. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to another edition of Tell Me Your Story, the Health Muse is in. And I have a wonderful guest today for you to hear all about. Her name is Delaine Shay, and she has been through some bumpy roads in her life and overcome alcoholism, and now is helping others through a variety of means, including spiritual. So I want you to hear her story, because if you know anybody who has been struggling, or if you have been struggling with this, then this is the perfect podcast for you to listen to. So thank you so much, Delaine, for joining me. I am so delighted to have you here. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Cheryl. Well, I grew up in a small town in South Dakota, one of the biggest places for the coronavirus right now. Unwelcome. I grew up in a small town of 200, and I say that's counting cats and dogs. And, everybody knew everybody. And I didn't really like the fact that they knew so much about our lives. And I had a lot of shame, and I'll tell you some of that as we go on here. But I had 3 sisters and a brother. And my dad worked at a grain elevator across the dirt road then from our house in Trent. And I went on to go to school in Trent. There were 8 in my class. And when I was a sophomore, the school closed and I had to go to another town where there were almost 80 in my class.
So that was a little bit of a shock.
Oh my gosh. My defense was to smile all day long, smile at everybody, and just everything's wonderful. And then I'd go home and just cry my eyes out. And my mom had started working as a dorm matron at a government Indian school in a different town. And so she wasn't home for me a lot of the time when I needed her. But I just kept smiling and going through it. And
To interrupt you for 1 second. When I was in my early 30s, I went to see a play on Broadway called Getting My Act Together and Putting It on the Road. And there's actually a song in that play called Smile, Smile, Smile. Daddy always taught me that I should smile no matter how I felt. And I tell you, that song hit me right in the middle of my head because we are brought up to smile no matter what as women. And
yeah,
that's not a good thing that we can't express how we really feel, that we're just there smiling away. So I understand
yeah,
exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, smile away. And I see people now, if I see somebody just smiling all the time, I think, oh my gosh, that must be in so much pain. But of course, back then I didn't know that. And when I was 17, well, I'll back up. I told you I had three sisters. I had two older sisters, and I had a brother who was older than me by 16 months. And my dad accidentally backed over Billy, and he died. Billy died instantly. And so it was 2 more years before my younger sister was born. But that was a huge trauma, of course.
And the
And
family didn't heal from that easily, I'm sure.
oh, I just sometimes I think of how in the world did my mother grieve when I was probably, I was almost 3. I'm sure I was crying for Billy, crying for Billy. And through the years, she really watched me and watched how I would enter situations and how I'd have to go off and be alone. If there was a big family gathering, I needed some time to go off by myself. And it surprised me once when she told me that. She said, "Yeah, I know. You always need some time alone." So she was a wise woman, but carried a lot of pain. And in my 20s, I asked her if she was mad at Dad for backing over Billy. And I said, you have a right to be if you are. And she said, "Heavens, no. That was my little boy, and I didn't know where he was." My sisters and my brother had gone across the street, across the dirt road to the elevator to say hi to Dad, which they were not supposed to do. And that's how the accident happened. So my sisters witnessed that. But
And
going
the
back,
pain that he had to be tremendous.
oh, tremendous. Yeah. And Mom made up her mind. I found this out when a neighbor girl was all grown up and had a teenage son who was killed in a car accident. I heard my mom say, "Peggy, I think you need to really know that one of you has got to be strong in this, and I think it's going to be you." And that told me right there. That's what Mom had decided. She was going to be strong no matter what. So when Dad had his first nervous breakdown, that's what we called them then. When he had his first nervous breakdown, I was about 10. Mom got him to a hospital 50 miles away. She couldn't drive there. She called his brothers, who were there in a flash, just like they were when she called him when Billy died. And they took Dad to the hospital. And I think Dad was probably hospitalized probably 4 times at least over the years for what we always called his nerves, mental illness, which, we don't want to, I shouldn't say we, I still see the stigma of
Right.
mental
We
illness.
seem to be getting a little bit more away from the stigma of mental illness, but we've got a ways to go.
Yeah. And maybe in South Dakota, it's a little more. I had a friend take her life a few weeks ago, I told you about, and mental illness was attached to that. And she had gone to the hospital once or twice, and they wanted her to go back to the hospital, and she just refused. She couldn't do it. She just couldn't do it anymore. And I just saw the stigma with that, of, I just looked and said, I was hospitalized when I was 19 for a nervous breakdown. When I was 17, I went to x-ray school because that was a way I could work my way through school without the funds. Mom and dad didn't have money. I didn't know how to get into college. I wanted to go to college, but I didn't know how to do it. Plus, when I was in high school, I started drinking. And I remember making an oath when I had to change schools. Well, I am not going to be a drinker. Well, guess what? I found out that it made me feel good and I could be funny and laugh and not worry until I got home in my bed and it was this gloom and doom that I would
As alcohol does that, it
yeah,
makes you happy, and then as it comes
yeah.
down, it makes you
It's a
very
it's a
depressed.
depressant. And so when I was a junior, my mom called me at school and my dad was traveling the state then as a salesman for a feed company. And mom said, I need you to tell me where dad's at. I've got to talk to him. And I knew something was wrong. And I said, I'm not going to tell you until you tell me why. And little obstinate there, but I knew something. And she said, your uncle hurt himself today. And he had taken his life. And so I left school and I went. Mom met me and I took her car and I went and got my little sister from another town in school. And then I drove out to my aunt's place, my dad's sister. I don't know how, Cheryl, that I was able to have 5 or 10 minutes alone with her, but we sat together in these green wingback chairs. And I said, Aunt Hilda, I just think that he is in heaven. I really believe he's in heaven. I think God is so loving and gracious. And she said, how in the world did you get so wise? I didn't feel wise at all.
Because there is a stigma when you're Christian about people who take their own life.
Yep.
And I grew up strongly believing that God loves all his children. That's not what makes him love them or not love them. So it makes me crazy when I hear people talking like that.
Yeah.
But you were very wise at your age.
Yeah. Yeah, I was. I'd been through a lot of stuff by then. And, but that's when my drinking in high school really picked up. It was just too much. And the family had the uncle had tried a couple times before, but the family had kept it from my dad because they didn't want to upset him. Where dad, said, doggone it, I could have talked to him and told him how I was feeling. It goes back to that suicide thing of just thinking, oh, if I could only say such and such.
Right.
Yeah. But so I was drinking when I went to x-ray school at the age of 17, 3 weeks after I graduated from high school. A little too young. But
yeah.
The first day, the instructor, the head of the department, took me to the morgue to x-ray an elderly woman to see if her neck had been broken. And some noise happened and I about jumped out of my shoes. And he thought that was so hilarious. And when we went back downstairs to the x-ray department, all the, other students were around and he told the story and, oh, everybody laughed so hard. And I had to laugh and act like it was funny too. But oh boy, it wasn't. So anyway, I had a lot of traumas during that first 10 months of school at that hospital. And I just kept getting more depressed. And then my roommate decided to quit and marry her boyfriend. And so she was just such a neat friend to have. But I started going to counseling because my mom had got my dad to counseling. I knew I needed counseling. And then one day
that was wise too.
Wasn't that? One day I went over to my sister's. She lived in an apartment near me and she was going to make me some lunch. And I was like, I couldn't make a decision on using salt or pepper, or I was just done. And I cried and cried, and she called Dad, and Mom was working, so I was hospitalized in the mental health ward, which, afterwards I had to make many jokes about to friends, having a beer and say, oh yeah, I was in the crazy ward, and it was terrible. It was very traumatic and very shaming. And back then they didn't have the resources that they have now. But we would be taken outside to walk a certain route around the hospital, which if I go down that street any day, I'm on that walk. And I felt like we were treated like dogs being taken for a walk, when all they wanted to do was to get us outside and get us to exercise some. But anyway, it was very traumatic. And when we had our meals, we had to go to the lunchroom where everybody else was eating, other students and visitors, and I had to walk by the X-ray students and just covered with shame. And it was interesting years later talking to a few of them of how deeply they felt for me at the time. But, I had to smile and act like everything's okay.
And you didn't know that they were being that compassionate.
No, no. I thought they were thinking, what a loser. She can't hold it together. She's not strong enough. Yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad that we don't express those things to each other so that we know earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. And now we know, and we do. And I really try to get that message to young people when I can, to try to help them know, like even saying, this is what you could say to somebody. You can tell them, oh, I feel bad for you, instead of just being silent.
Right.
Because
Right.
it's a tough thing to know. How do I handle this? What do I do? Yeah.
Yeah. No, and we don't, when we are faced with someone else's crises or someone else's illness, which I have gone through, where I've had friends who had cancer, and people would say, when you see her, would you please tell her blah? Well, for God's sakes, pick up the phone and tell her yourself.
Ah.
I never had that inability to reach out and still be there, but no one around me seemed to be able to do that. And I have never really understood that. But same thing with somebody who's having a different kind of crisis, a mental illness crisis. People don't know what to say, so they'd rather not say anything at all and just avoid the person, which is, you don't have to do that.
Yeah. At my book launch party, a grade school and high school friend was there, and I read a story about my dad being hospitalized the first time, and she said, I never knew that. I thought maybe he went away somewhere for work. I had no idea. And we lived in the same small town.
Well, you live in a town small enough that it's amazing that they didn't know that.
Amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's yours was the kind of town where the whole town knew everybody's business, whether you wanted them to or not.
Exactly. And I couldn't wait to get out of there, because that coat of shame was so heavy and so binding. I wanted some anonymity.
Mm-hmm.
And now I can look back and, well, I'm jumping into my book a little bit, but last spring, I went to an event at my hometown. They have a pancake feed every year, the firemen, to raise money for the fire department. And so I asked if I could come and sell my books.
Why don't you tell everybody what your book is called, because that'll put it into perspective.
Okay. my book is called And Then We Laughed, a memoir of hope and healing. And the laughter part is, getting through things and being able to, not right away all the times, but being able to turn something around into laughter where, can just,
And laughter is a huge component of health.
oh, it's huge, isn't it? Yes. And, my husband has dementia, but every day we laugh about something. We laugh about something. But anyway, I went to this pancake feed, and here is this. Well, there were a couple hundred people there, and I had different ones come up to me and talk about my book and talk about just the coat of shame was off. My coat of shame was off. It was laying on the ground behind me, and I was able to talk and visit without that. And for people to ask me questions, or people to say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. And then the biggest gift I've had is that people come to me and tell me things about their life, sacred bits from their life after they've heard me tell my story. And I never knew, my writing teacher had told me, now when you go talk about your book, remember it's not about you. And I said, it's a memoir. How can it not be about me? And he said, just believe me, it's not about you. And so that first time, when people came up and, there was a man who talked to me about the suicide of his son, and different people would tell me these things. And it was like, oh God, that's what it's about. It's not about me. It's not about how many books I can sell. It's about how can their life be touched by my story? How can they find some healing? How can they feel empowered? How can they laugh about some things that go, oh yeah. And that.
And let me stop you for a second. Tell people what you do for a living now, so that
Okay.
that puts it into perspective too.
Tell people what I do for a living.
Right.
Well, my main job right now is caretaker for my husband. And I am a spiritual director. And I went to school for 2 years and was certified as a spiritual director. And that means to me is I listen to people's stories. I listen to what they have to say and try to reflect back to them their strengths. And we have a caregiver who is moving away, and we love her dearly, but she's leaving us. And I said, but your dream is coming true. Here you've been telling me about this dream for a year, and it's coming true. And that just, helped to energize her more, rather than feeling guilty for leaving us.
Right.
To know that, hey, we're celebrating this for you. We're going to grieve, but we're going to
And you're going to miss her.
We're going to miss her. She's hilarious. We laugh about more things, but so that is a real gift. And then I meet once a month with some women in a book study for spiritual direction. And then I meet once a month with a group that we have what is called peer supervision. And we'll take turns talking about maybe something we've talked about with somebody that we have a problem with. I want to get this out here. What is it? And it's not about the client we see, it's about what is going on with me. What do I need to grow in? Or how can you help me realize some things? And one time, this gal said to me, after I had gone through my little case study, or she said, well, Delaine, I see that you have a fierce determination to survive. And at first, I was taken aback, because I heard the word fierce. I heard the word fierce, and I had a bit of shame.
And you do have a gentle personality, so fierce would not be a word I would choose for you. But in the context that she used it, it makes sense.
And yeah, it made sense. It fit into my story. That's part of, when I was growing up, I had to be fierce to survive because my parents were both loving and dear, but they were kind of absent too because of my brother's death. And then 6 years later, my mom's only 16-year-old brother died when a drunk driver hit him at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. And so there were just a lot of things, floods that we had to move from our house, a fire in the middle of the night. I had to have some fierceness. But what you said of gentle personality, I am much more gentle than I ever realized. I've had, people in recovery say, oh, you're so gentle. And I would go, me? This fierce, determined woman? But I found out that that's okay. That's okay. That's what I had to do. And I learned, I've been so blessed to be able to have teachers in my life that I've learned from. And by teachers, I don't mean necessarily in school. I mean in life, just like you, Cheryl, of some of the things you've shared with me. I learned from that. And I get to be open. And, with my alcoholism.
Which I want you to go back and explain sort of what your transition with all of that was.
Okay. So I started drinking, pretty heavy after my uncle took his life. And then when I was in X-ray school, there were so many traumatic things. I really drank heavy. And shame, oh, so full of shame. And one time we had a family gathering at the house, and Dad had a cooler with beer in it. And I was 19, 20. I had a beer, everybody had a beer, and I went back and I got another bottle of beer. And he yelled, you put that back. You don't need that. I was so embarrassed and so ashamed, but I thought to myself, yeah, I do need that. I need it. But I didn't understand that I was an alcoholic. I'm sorry for that background noise.
I was going to say, do you know where that's coming from?
Yeah, it's done now.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry.
John can probably screen that out, so we're okay.
So then I was dating a guy who went to Vietnam, my best friend's brother, and crazy about him. We made plans. We were going to meet somewhere on his leave. And he went, and I was an X-ray tech. I was living with another gal, and we were used to going out and partying. And I stayed home, for about 6 weeks. Nope, not going anywhere, want to stay true to Roger. And then one night, oh, come on, it's just a couple drinks. Well, I had a couple drinks and I met a guy that night. And by golly, he drank like me. And so we ended up together. And it was not a good situation at all. We weren't suited for each other.
Yeah, you brought out the worst in each other.
Pardon?
You brought out the worst in each other.
Yeah. And I was so immature, just so immature. And the alcohol was so important. And we got pregnant right away. And I had just had radiation for a myelogram. And the doctor, I found out later it was the radiologist, but the doctor who my sisters both worked for, called me and my husband into his office and said, some of us doctors have been talking and we don't think that your pregnancy is viable and we think you should have an abortion. Now, back then, doctors were God. And he said, but I can't make the appointment for you. You have to do that. And we had to travel across the state. And I remember we just sat there and the doctor finally picked up the phone and made the appointment. My husband was a high school teacher and a farmer. And we had to put off the appointment to go have it done because he had some crop he had to tend to first. And I started hating him from that moment. And he wanted his mother to go with me instead. And, we weren't that great a match anyway, but neither one of us knew how to deal with what we were dealing with. I talked to my pastor, I talked to different people, there was nobody who stood by me. My husband said, and it's true, I said, gee, I've been taking all these, I should say, I injured my back lifting a patient. That's why I had the x-rays. And I said, I've been taking these pain pills, and Valium was big back then. And I said, I'm afraid that, something's going to be wrong with the baby. Well, once he heard that, his mind was made up. And so we went through it, and it was absolutely.
We didn't know how medication impacted any of that back then.
No. So it was horrifying, and we ended up, I think we were together 5 more years, miserable for both of us. So
and you're still drinking through all of this.
Still drinking. Oh yeah, still drinking. And then when we got divorced, I decided, drinking has really caused a lot of problems. I'm going to really watch it. I'm going to watch it. And so I did. If I went out somewhere, I'd be like, oh no, I can just have a little bit here and just really going to be careful. And then every once in a while it'd be too much, but I'd be back to, no, I'm going to really watch it. And I was going back to college then. I'd finished x-ray school, couldn't keep on because of the injury. I was going to a university, and I was taking a medical sociology class, and I was going to a divorce support group, and a guy showed a film. It'd be the old reel and the screen that you pull down. He was showing a film on alcoholism in the family. Well, I decided for medical sociology, I was going to write a paper on alcoholism in the family because I really got it. And I got an A+ on that, on the paper and the my speech. They didn't know that writing that paper, I was sitting with the old time typewriter, cigarette over here, Lord Calvert and 7 here, drinking away. Well, if you get an A+ on your paper, you're pretty much an expert on alcoholism then. Couldn't be me. Couldn't be me.
Yes, funny how we don't see things in ourselves sometimes that we need to see.
Oh, golly. Following Thanksgiving, my mom called and wanted to know when I was coming home from Thanksgiving. I was hungover. I got so mad at her. I screamed at her on the phone. And we hung up, and I was just horrified. I thought, how could I have talked to her like that? Well, I've really got to watch it now. Well, it ended up that I met a guy. I actually went through this divorce support group, came back, and was a facilitator. And I met this guy who was a facilitator, and we liked each other. And I was going to make darn sure that I didn't drink like I drank in the first marriage and below this one. So I had no idea that when you're so obsessed on how much you drink, that is still the obsession with the substance.
Right.
It's part of the disease. And I didn't get that. But one day at work, he called me, and I was a business manager at a medical clinic. I managed 2 medical clinics. And I was sitting in the office. He called and said, "Hey, I'm going to go to an Al-Anon meeting tonight. Would you like to go along?" And I swiveled around in my chair, so I was facing the window, and tears were running down my face. I thought, I can't take care of one more person. I just can't do it. You know, like I had that control anyway, but I thought I thought ever since I was little that I was supposed to make things better for my parents. I was supposed to make them happy, and I failed over and over and over. But I still had that in me that I had to make things better for somebody else. So I went to the meeting. We heard something about having an emotional breakdown, and we're driving to a restaurant afterwards for coffee. We met a good friend of ours went with us to the meeting, Judy. And I'm crying after the meeting. And Owen said, what's going on? And I said, I'm having an emotional breakdown. I had no idea what that was. But we get to the restaurant, we're talking, and I'm here. Both of them are right over here facing me. And we're talking, and all of a sudden I said, "Hey, you guys, I think I'm an alcoholic." I mean, I was happy. And they both just grinned ear to ear. Now, if it would have been at a different time, that would have really ticked me off. But I said, "You guys knew?" "Well, yeah, Owen has been saying that you've been really needy," and which I was really needy, really jealous, really scared of him dying, not scared of him suffering and dying, scared that I would be left alone. It was all about me. And, that's what we say about alcoholism is the alcohol, and then ism is I, self, and me, because it turns a person inward. It's a disease that turns a person inward. And a lot of people have trouble believing it's a disease, but
Oh, no, it is.
yeah, in 1956, AMA declared it as a disease, but there is still that huge stigma. Not so much in other places, but I've been in recovery now for 34 years. And when I wrote my book, I tell about my alcoholism and mental illness, but I tell about it so that if there's somebody out there who is feeling the same way or going through similar things, you're not alone. I had a gal, I went to a meeting in another town as the guest speaker, and this big gal came in, and she was kind of tough, and I was kind of like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I gave my talk, and afterwards she said, "You know what? I decided if you can do it, so can I." And that's the only person I remember from the meeting was her.
The reason that I do these interviews is because I want people to be able to hear somebody who's dealing with what they're dealing with, and I want to give them hope. And
Yes.
that's why I was so delighted that you and I had connected, because I have not talked to anybody with alcoholism, and I know that it's a huge problem out there. And I want to have somebody on the show that people can listen to that know that they can come out the other end of it. These are all about giving hope.
Yeah. And that night that I realized I was an alcoholic, we went back to Judy's house with her husband, and we talked till 1 or 2 in the morning. And I said, "What do I do now? Do I go to treatment, or what do I do?" And they said, "Well, we think that you're so darn excited about it," because everything they said to me, I said, "Wow. Oh, wow." They were telling me things about myself. I thought it was all about myself, but it's about other alcoholics.
Right.
And
it's also about how you're impacting their lives.
Yeah. And so they said, "We think that if you would go to 90 meetings in 90 days, that should be good. And my husband would tell people, yeah, she went to 120 meetings, which kind of close.
Yeah.
But I was so hungry and I was so desperate. And I read everything I could. I went to meetings. I connected with people after meetings. I called people. I had a sponsor who I could call and talk things over with. I went to, over the 34 years, I've gone to 3 codependency treatments. And I went to another, I had a counselor who, whatever she said, I would do. But at the very beginning, when I went to her 2 years sober, she said, "You don't trust anybody." And I said, "Yes, I do." And she said, "No, you don't. Who do you trust?" I said, "Well, I trust you." She said, "You pay me." And I left there and I thought, okay, I am going to go out and find people to trust.
That's your fierceness.
Yeah,
Right
it's
there.
that determination that comes out. You tell me I don't trust, I'll show you I trust. Yeah. And so, and then spiritually, there is a Bible teacher, Joyce Meyer, who, this happened at a time in my sobriety when I was, my back was flared up very bad. I was pretty much in bed or on a couch for 2 years, and that included meals and riding in a vehicle. And somebody had said to me, I didn't even know the gal, she said, "Oh gosh, you should listen to these tapes by Joyce Meyer on grace, grace, and more grace." And I said, "Well, how do I get them?" And she said, "I've got them, I'll loan them to you." I said, "Okay." And so I waited, she didn't bring them. And so I called. "Oh yeah, I'll get them over there." No, she didn't. Took 3 phone calls. That, again, that fierce determination. I called her the 3rd time and said, "Really, I need to listen to those tapes." And so she brought them by. And then I found Joyce Meyer on TV.
I was
And
going to say she's famous. I know the name.
yeah, and I studied, I ordered her tapes and I transcribed them. I was laying in bed. I didn't, you know. So my faith is just extremely important to me and important to share with others, for them to find their own path. I gladly share my path with others, but having a personal relationship with my God, with my Lord and Savior, is just fantastic. And that's what I got when I got sober, is I learned to start trusting. I listened to other people talk, and I never heard more talk about praying than I did in those meetings. I go to church, I didn't hear talk about praying, pray about this. Did you pray about this? And that's what the meetings were like. "Oh, well, have you prayed about it?" What? And the power of that is just magnificent. And there's something else I wanted to bring up, was about my parents and getting help. Part of the reason I wrote my book was that, well, I'd been in a writing group for 20 years and I was writing little stories here and there, sad and funny. But my dad died, and then 3 years later, the next year, Mom was in a nursing home, and the 3 of us girls that were left, my older sister died of ovarian cancer 21 years ago, but Mom was in a town where we weren't there and we couldn't get there to help her. So since my sister was an RN at a nursing home, we decided Mom would go there. And so my husband and I went and picked her up, and Mom and I are sitting in the back seats of our van and driving along, and Mom's pretty quiet. And then she said, D-Sir, she always called me D-Sir because that's what my brother called me. D-Sir, I feel like I'm going to a strange land. And I said, well, you are, Mom. It is. But Lucy's there. You're going to be okay. And then Mom told me, she said, I would tell people, I was writing stories then in the writers group and sending them to her. And she said, I'm afraid to tell people here all that's happened in my life because they'll think that I just want attention. And I knew exactly what she meant. And that was part of, I'm telling the story. But I swore that I would never tell about my brother's death until my dad had died. And talk about divine providence. The week after he died, I was asked to give my testimony at church. And I wrote it, but then I sat in the pew and thought, okay, Lord, do I talk about Billy or not? Do I tell the story or not? And I told it. And my mom was watching on TV. And I called her afterwards. Mom, what'd you think? I'm so glad you did. I'm so glad. So I got to tell her story. And when my dad was hospitalized the last time, I had this gut feeling that the psychiatrist wasn't getting the whole story. So my friend who was a counselor helped me get in to see this psychiatrist. And I said, Doctor, I know you can't tell me anything, about Dad, but I want to tell you. And I said, did he tell you that when he was 17, his brother hung himself and he had to cut him down? Did he tell you about his only son, backing over his only son? And the doctor's going, no. And I named all these different things, and the psychiatrist knew none of them. My dad had not told any of them. So, I got to be the storyteller for my mom and dad. I got to be their voice.
Which was so important because the healing had to start with
Mm-hmm.
you telling the story that
Yeah.
they couldn't tell.
Yeah. I had to dig into what was going on in their lives. That made a huge difference for me in my recovery and my counseling. And I still, to this day, I go to a spiritual director. I've done that for 32 years, and it's at least once a month. And I go to a counselor when I need to go to a counselor. Something comes up and it's, oh, I'm going to go talk to Dr. Shelley about it. I need to get this worked out. So I have been through a lot, but I've been given a lot. I've got I say that writing my book was messy because I had to go through some of that stuff again.
Right.
And, Elizabeth Taylor was interviewed once and asked, why aren't you writing your memoir? It wasn't called a memoir then. Everybody's doing it. And she said, there's no way I'm going through that stuff again. And I remember I cut that article out. And so.
But they also say when you're ready to finally tell your story,
Yes.
is when the healing really begins.
Yes. And there is that's very important, Cheryl, what you said about the readiness. There has to be a readiness. And some counselors I talked to, other than my regular one, well, I wanted to go back and be a counselor. So I was starting classes to get my master's. But first of all, I had to take these standardized tests, personality tests. And the head of the school sat down with me to go through the results. And, we went all through these different ones. And he said, now, this score, Delaine, shows that you have an anger level of someone in prison. And this next score shows you're not likely to get over it.
Yeah. Sometimes I hate those tests because sometimes I think they're bull.
Yeah. And so I just.
Certainly it made you stop and think.
Oh, I couldn't wait to get out of there. And I cried all the way home, and I got just close to our house and saw my husband's car home, and I thought, oh no. So when I came in, he could see I was just very upset. And before I would tell him, I made him swear over and over, you've got to promise me you won't tell anybody. Nobody can know this, not anybody. Okay, I swear I won't. And so I told him, and he held me as I cried. And then I went in the bedroom and I got down on my knees to pray. And this isn't original. It's from what I learned in recovery. God said to me, no, Delaine, you can't get yourself over this, but I can. Mm-hmm. I can give you the strength to get over this, to get through this, not over it, to get through this. And to learn that's a part of, that anger is a part of me. And so that ended up being very helpful. And
it also makes you more empathetic for what you ended up doing. When you have people that you're working with, you understand it differently than had this incident not happened to you.
Exactly. In fact, I told it at a women's Bible study one time, and this other gal said, that happened to me with him too. So, and for me, making Owen vow he would not tell anybody, and then here I started telling everybody the story and laughing about it, oh yeah, I got the anger in prison, and laughing away. That's the part of it. And then we laughed.
Right. But when you can laugh at yourself is also a huge step of healing.
Yes. Yeah. My mom was pretty darn good about laughing at herself and finding things to laugh about. And my dad had this, we'd go to a movie, and back in the day, they would have a cartoon, Bugs Bunny or something, or the Roadrunner was real popular. And my dad had this boisterous laughter, and I would be like, don't let it know I'm here. So embarrassed. Well, years later, I was at a movie with my nephew, and I started laughing so loud. And he's going, shh, shh.
Yeah, I was lucky. I grew up in a family where dinner, we told stories on ourselves. So, and we would tell them over and over again. If something funny had happened last year, that was one of the stories. That, it didn't matter how long it went back or how embarrassing it was.
Right.
We all told stories about ourselves and about each other. And I was telling a story to someone, and they said, wow, you really don't feel very good about yourself, do you? And I said, au contraire, because I can laugh about all this stuff. Because that was my family background. I don't have any problems with my self-esteem. This is just all part of who I am. Yeah. And I'm very blessed that I had that in my family. And those are some of my best memories.
Yeah, we were able to laugh. And that, what my book is short chapters of maybe something serious that happened, but then I'll go to a funny story.
Yep.
Or at least what I think is funny, because I've always told my grandkids, I really think I'm quite funny at times, and maybe they don't. Maybe they don't. I retell stories about them growing up, and it's kind of
that's kind of like what we were always doing, is retelling stories.
Okay, Grandma, enough on that one.
But then they'll grow older and they'll remember.
Oh, they love it. They love to hear those stories. Yeah, no, it was actually my youngest stepson who I was always telling a story about him, and he said, okay, let's put that one to rest. I was enjoying it way more than he was.
Yeah, I don't think families, maybe in South Dakota they still do. In California, I don't think families sit around the table and do that because they don't always eat their meals together. And it's something I encourage clients to do because It's another way of being grateful because you
Oh,
have your family and you're sharing with them in a
and
way that's different than how you share with anybody else. And
yeah,
it's really very beautiful.
it is. And the connection, when
Mhm.
you say sitting around the table, it's that connection. Yeah, it's priceless. I just, I feel so blessed my grandpa he had three young children die. One at 2.5, Delaine was her name,
Ah,
and she died of the flu. And then Tommy, 16, and Beverly, 44. They all died early, but as grandpa was nearing his death, he said, "Oh, Deezer, I've had such a wonderful life." And for years I thought, how could grandpa say that? I saw him crying his eyes out. I saw him trying to get my uncle's coffin open. But he could say, "I've had such a wonderful life." And when I got to the end of my book, it embodied me.
uh-huh.
It fit me.
Hmm.
I said, "I've had a wonderful life." Even though, you know, junk happens to people.
It
Really
does. It
does.
happens to all of us.
Yep, we all
You know,
have
we seem to think that we get the worst cards, or, I even
Yep,
have people who approach me when I get out and speak and go, yeah, 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 but I got dealt a really bad set of cards. No, you didn't. It's what you do with it that makes the difference.
yeah,
We all get dealt bad cards.
yeah,
It's how we handle them.
yeah.
That,
And I have to applaud my parents for how I was pretty critical of them for quite a while. And when I married my husband, Owen, he just fell in love with them right away. And he would point out things about, "Are you kidding me? Your mom's great." And that was such a beautiful gift. In
what
uh,
made you sit back and take a different look.
yes, yes, it certainly did. And one time, a couple years before Dad died, we were riding with him and Mom in their van, and I'm sitting right behind Dad, who's driving. And Dad always through the years would say, "Oh, you're just like your mother." And it wasn't a compliment. So that day he said, "Yeah, you're just like your mother." And I said, "Dad, I have realized that I'm a lot more like you than I ever knew." And he very quietly said, "Yeah, I know."
We're all very complicated beings, but
Yeah,
that's very
it
cute.
is. And for someone who just did not want to be like either parent, I am so glad that I am like them in different ways. And
Oh yeah. I even now when I look in the mirror, I even see my mother in
yeah,
funny little ways. I get a hair off my chin the same place that she had hers. I'm looking at my mother in the mirror and go, how did that happen? I didn't think I looked like her when I was young, but there she is looking at me again. It's kind of sweet because I miss her. So
yeah.
I'm kind of becoming her over the years.
Or if I say something, it's like, "Oh my gosh, Mom would have said that."
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah, it's a joy.
It
It's a
keeps them
joy.
close.
And I wanted to mention just something about grief real quick. Um, the meetings I go to are 12-step based. And for me, I have found, and I tell other people, that I believe the 12 steps are a beautiful map for grieving. They help walk a person through. Going through is important to acceptance, the bargaining, all of the steps of grief. And when we sit together, I meet regularly with women and in a group, and we each tell parts of our sacred stories. And there's parts of grieving that are involved in that. When our friend died a few weeks ago, we got together on Zoom and we grieved together and talked about it. And I really learned more on how to grieve by going through this. And I've said, you know, we've cried a river of tears, but we've laughed ourselves silly too. Yeah.
Which are the best friends.
Yeah.
That you
Yeah.
can be that real with each other. It's lovely.
Yeah. To get to be that real. Boy.
And something I wanted to comment on, because you're probably aware of this. One of the chapters in my book is on the blue zones.
Yes.
And the blue zones now have 9 or 10 things that they have found in common with the communities where people grow old with the least disease and keep their brains. And one of the big things on their list is some level of spirituality. They all have that. It is a huge component of health and growing old with grace and
Yeah.
staying healthy.
Yeah.
And so you finding your faith through this whole process was important for your healing, and it's also important for your health. And that's something that you can share with other people. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. You know, my mom, I went to this phenomenal nun. I'm Lutheran. I went to this nun for spiritual direction. And my mom started saying to me, you should go and do what Sister Del Rey does. And I said, are you kidding me? There's no way. And the school was 90 miles away. And because of my back troubles, I can't drive that far. So I just thought it was never going to happen. And then they decided to have the class online. And then we would go to this place for 4 different weekends, intensives. So I asked a gal if she would drive me. But anyway, when I got accepted, Owen and I drove up to this nursing home where Mom was, thinking she is going to be so thrilled to hear I'm going to go to spiritual direction school, you know, just like she's been telling me.
Yep.
So we get there and I said, Mom, guess what? I got accepted into the spiritual direction for spiritual formation group. And she said, well, don't think you're going to change me.
That's where you got your fierceness from. She had that feistiness too.
And my husband said, yeah, she's going to be a nun. And I said, I felt such a spiritual moment at that time. I wanted to choke both of them. Just wanted to choke them both.
I know. But
Yeah,
that's actually something my mother would have said.
yeah. And it was
She
funny.
got more out there the older she got. So she had no problem, just don't think this is going to happen for me. And whoa, was she independent. She fought for every shred of independence she had long past when she should have had any. But yep.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. So and then when I started school, I thought, oh, this is going to be this wonderful spiritual journey. Oh, I'm just going to grow and blossom. And I got going in school and all hell broke loose. My mom died, a daughter-in-law had breast cancer, just a number of things happened. I got in a disagreement with a nun, and
Well, you were going through spiritual growth, just not the road that you thought you were going to be on.
right. It wasn't going to be this breezy, easy. It was just exactly what I needed.
Right.
It was
Funny
exactly
how that works.
Yeah, I was just exactly where I needed to be. Yeah.
So I'm going to bring it to a close, but I want to ask you, if you were going to go back to that 17-year-old girl that started to drink and you wanted to give her some advice, what would you tell her today?
I would put my arms around her and I would say, it's okay, honey. I'm here to help you. It's okay.
You're not alone. Beautiful. Well, I have loved the conversation. Thank you so much for being so open and so willing to share your whole background. You're a beautiful person, and I appreciate you telling the story. And I hope everybody out there has also grown and learned. And if you know anybody who has had a problem with alcoholism or with life just becoming too overwhelming, that you want to have listened to this, send them and have them listen to this episode, because this is for them too. Okay, I'm going to get emotional. Thank you. Tell them about your book and where to find it. And yes, I do notes. I don't get a lot of room, but I do notes under the show, and how to find you, how to buy your book. All of that will be in the notes underneath our conversation.
And Then We Laughed, A Memoir of Hope and Healing, is available on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. And it's also on my website, which Cheryl is going to post.
Yeah, I'm going to put that there so that you all know how to find her. I'm going to give them the Amazon link and Barnes and Noble links as well.
Cheryl, you've made this just so wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, we waited a long time to get it together, but I'm so glad we did. Thank you very much.
Thank you.